Hello everyone, it's Natalia, also known as Chef Rudakova here. I'm a professional chef, a certified nutritionist and a food content creator. You might know me from my YouTube or other social media. But today I'm here, and if you don't know me yet, I'm glad to finally caught your attention. You're going to find exactly the culinary information you're looking for in my course. This course is an introductory course to culinary education. This is not a collection of recipes. It's rather a carefully selected package of theoretical knowledge about culinary techniques and skills with elaborate examples. As I often say, knowing 1,000 recipes is not going to make you a great chef, but knowing culinary techniques and food science will. And this course is exactly what it's about. In the following 9 lessons and the bonus one, you're going to learn all the basics of the essential culinary topics on which you're going to need to work on and develop in order to really kill it in the kitchen and become a great chef. This course is a beginner introductory course, so it's suitable for anyone with a desire to really dig deeper into the culinary world. Some of the examples that I give here, they refer directly to the professional kitchens. However, all the information that's being taught can be applied to home cooking as well. So you don't necessarily need to be striving for a professional career in cooking in order to go through this course. What you need to have is a sincere interest in the culinary world. So whoever you are, a passionate pro-home cook, an aspiring young person considering going to a culinary school in the future, or an experienced chef wishing to refresh on your culinary knowledge and theory, this course is for you. I hope you do enjoy it and you learn something new and valuable that's going to take you a step further into your culinary journey. Don't forget to download the course book with extra tips and information, and I'll see you soon in the coming lessons. In this second video of our culinary course, we're going to talk about essential flavors. First of all, we're going to discover what they are, learn what is the flavor profile of the dish, find out how to build it and how to balance it. When we are talking about the essential culinary flavors, first of all, we need to talk about the type of tastes that we as humans can recognize. And the way that our mouth is structured is that the taste buds that are mostly located on our tongue, and some of them are located on the throat, can perceive 5 main types of tastes, which are sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and recently recognized umami flavor. The selection of food items over here are the best to describe each of these tastes. Lemons, they give us the sour taste. Dates give us the sweetness, well, salt is salty. Black peppercorns, they give us very bitter taste. And the best way to describe the umami flavor would be to taste MSG. When you're building the flavor profile of your dish, you should consider 2 groups of flavors that should be present on your plate. These are the primary flavors that should reflect the flavor of your main ingredient, and the secondary supporting flavors, which represent all the other ingredients on your plate that should support and enhance the flavor of the main ingredient. If your main ingredient is quite plain and doesn't have much flavor on its own, the seasoning that you would choose and the other ingredients on the plate should enhance and create the depth of flavor on the dish, and everything is called the flavor profile. Typically, but not always, it is better to have a simpler flavor profile rather than a very complex one, because it's just harder to balance it. It is advised to focus on the quality of the ingredients itself. The better the ingredients are, the fresher they are, the more flavor they will bring to your dish on themselves. The flavors of all the ingredients on your plate can either harmonize or contrast. And if you decide to go with the contrast way, bear in mind that all the flavors should balance out. And your main ingredient should stay your main ingredient and bear the main flavor. Nothing should compete with it. So, for example, if you decide to add a little bit of acidity to your dish, it should not become too sour and overpower your main ingredient. It should add just a little bit of sourness to spike your taste buds. And at this point, you might ask me, but how do I know which flavors work well together? And the answer to this question is that if we were not living at the age of information, I would tell you to go and study the cuisines of the world to find out which flavors typically and traditionally work well together. So, for example, in Italy, it would be a combination of tomatoes, basil, and olive oil. In Greece, it would be oregano, yogurt, and lemon, and so on. And this would be a great adventure on its own and a lot of fun, so I would still encourage you to go and do that. However, Since we have internet, I would highly encourage you just to go on internet and search which flavor goes well with this specific ingredient that you're thinking about. And I could also recommend you one specific book. It's called The Flavor Bible, which a lot of chefs and baristas and pastry chefs have. You can use it as a reference. It contains all the traditional typical flavor combinations. Now let me give you an example of how you should be thinking when deciding how to build a flavor profile for your dish. The first question you should ask yourself is, what is the main ingredient? What's the primary ingredient of my dish? Let's say that you decided to cook a chicken, specifically chicken breast. The second question that you should ask yourself is, how am I going to cook it? Am I going to steam it? Am I going to bake it? And I'm going to sear it? Why do you need to ask this question? Because the culinary method of your choice is going to either add the flavor to your dish or take it away. So for example, if we decided to sear our chicken breast, which is quite flavorless on its own, the Maillard reaction that is created during the process of searing would add additional flavor to the dish. It would add a little bit of color and the crunch, in other words, texture to the dish. So we already kind of talked about the flavor of the primary ingredient, which is chicken in our case, and decided that it's quite mild. Now let's talk about the seasoning. The additional seasoning and flavoring of your choice should enhance the primary ingredient's flavor and not mask it in any way, and add just a little bit of that unidentifiable complexity to the dish. In our case, I'm just going to go for the salt, and I'm going to add it at the very end of our preparation. And this is the case with most of the culinary methods. However, in some cases, you would add your flavoring at the beginning or in the middle of your cooking preparation, because some of the flavors, they take time to open up and release the flavor, and some of them, if you choose to go for a very long cooking process, they will just lose their flavor and evaporate if you add them too early. And the final thing to decide on when building your plate is to think about the supporting ingredients and their flavor profiles. The role of the supporting ingredients is, well, to support the flavor of the main ingredient. So they should add to the texture, the color, and nutrition of the final plate. Right now on our plate we have just the chicken breast, which is seared, so it's quite crispy, but also dry. So let's think about the accompanying sauce to our chicken, because it's just the non-negotiable part of any main course. And the sauce that I would personally go for is the chicken veloute sauce. One of the mother sauces that we're going to talk about this specific sauce later on in other lessons, so don't worry about this too much if you don't know. The lesson that you should take out of this example is that the main ingredient in the chicken veloute sauce is chicken broth, not fish, not beef, specifically chicken broth. Because all the other choices that we have, they would dominate and fight the main flavor of our dish, which should stay chicken. You could also choose to add a little bit of nutmeg and lemon in this specific application. Again, not too much, not that it's too recognizable, just to add a little bit of complexity and spike up your senses. Right now on our plate we have our seared chicken and we have our sauce. So we have a little bit of texture variety going on and the flavor variety. But we are definitely missing on colors and we are definitely missing on nutrition. We need to add a little bit of fiber and a little bit of complex carbs. So in this specific example I would add some fresh salad to this dish with some fresh and vibrant green basil, red cherry tomatoes, colorful quinoa and olive oil vinaigrette. The flavors that you know work well together. And all of that is a perfect example how to create a complete enjoyable dish with balanced flavors and where a chicken is recognizable as the main ingredient. Stocks. This is the fundamental subject for any professional chef or home cook to learn and master. Without knowing how to properly prepare a stock, there is no way for you to move forward in your culinary journey, especially when it comes to a classical French cuisine. Even the word stock in French is fond, which stands for foundation. In this lesson, I actually wanted to share with you all kinds of stocks that are available out there and show you how to make them, but there's obviously no time in the frame of this basic fundamental culinary course. And there's actually no time for me to share with you so many things that I would like to show you. If you want to learn some of the culinary techniques and principles in greater details, do let me know the subject that you're most interested in, and I would be glad to make another course that would be more detailed. And now a little bit more theory before I show you how to make a classical chicken stock. First of all, let me clarify for you the difference between stocks and broths, which many people think it's the same thing, but it's not. And there are several theories on what the difference is, but it's widely accepted that stocks are made from simmering bones and vegetables, so they are more rich in gelatin and has less pronounced flavors, while as broths are made from simmering meats and vegetables, so they have a more deep and pronounced flavor at the end. So, for example, if you want to make a specific, very flavorful soup, you might want to go for a broth. However, if you're preparing some liquids for further preparation of sauces and braised liquids, stock might be a better option. When it comes to stocks, there are two main categories. There are white stocks and there are brown stocks. The cooking principle is generally the same, however, there is one difference. When it comes to brown stocks, the bones and the mirepoix that you use, you would need to brown it through the process of searing or roasting. The three categories of ingredients that are applicable when you are making any kind of stock are mirepoix, which is a collection of aromatic vegetables that contribute to the flavor of the stock, the water, of course, and some kind of bouquet garni or a sachet, which contains the herbs and spices of your choice. And if you're making a meat or fish stock, then of course you would need to add a fourth category, which is bones. Now let me show you how to prepare a proper stock on the example of classical chicken white stock. And I will be talking with you along the way and explain important tips and steps in this process. The first step in the procedure of making chicken and meat stocks would be to blanch the bones. And some chefs might consider this step optional, but I'm still going to show you so you understand why you might want to do it. The main reason for blanching your bones would be to get rid of some of the impurities that come with animal protein. And it's very important to start the process from very cold water because those impurities, they get dissolved only in cold water. The thing that you see me now skimming from the top of the water, this is exactly the impurities that I was talking about. Then you would typically bring this water to boil, and it will help to solidify those impurities. So it's quite easy to get rid of them. Once the water gets to the boiling point, you would fish out your bones and rinse them thoroughly. You don't need this water anymore, so you can get rid of it. Just to reiterate, if you haven't done the blanching of the bones part, you would end up with all these impurities in your actual stock. So you would have to continuously skim them from the top of the stock. So here are our blanched bones, and the second step in the procedure of making this specific chicken stock would be to put your bones in a pot and cover them again with cold water. Cold because some of the proteins, they're soluble only in cold water and we want maximal nutritional benefit from our stock. Now let's talk aromatics and mirepoix. When it comes to aromatics, you basically have two options. You can tie up a bouquet garni, or you can prepare a little sachet, a parcel, which is exactly what I'm doing here. The classical options for aromatics would be thyme, bay leaves, peppercorns, parsley stems, and cloves. As for you, you can add any kind of aromatics that you want. Just make sure that they do not overpower the main ingredient in your stock. In our case, it's chicken. As you remember, they should be complementary and supporting, not overwhelming. Mirepoix. The classical components of a white mirepoix would be onions, celery, and carrots. However, it's quite common also to add a little bit of parsnip, mushroom trims, and even tomatoes to add that cutting acidity. The size of cuts of your mirepoix depend on the length of time that you need to cook your stock. So, for example, vegetable stock would require the smallest pieces of mirepoix, and the largest cuts would go into the beef and veal stocks. After a couple of hours, your stock is basically done and it's time to strain it through several layers of cheesecloth. And the last point that I want to mention here, that it's very important to cool down your stock very quickly, especially the one that was based on any kind of meat. Maybe even use the double bowl with ice water as I'm doing here and refrigerate. Baking. Baking fresh breads in the restaurants used to be a norm. Nowadays, it's very far from it. Many restaurants, they pre-purchase pre-cooked breads and then they freeze it and then they defrost it and warm it up for you for the service, if you're lucky. And yes, bread making, it's a skill. It requires special skills, special knowledge and experience, and it's also very labor intensive. So many restaurants, they choose a different path. However, nowadays, serving fresh breads to your customers is considered to be a luxury and something that will definitely stand you out from the crowd and attract new customers. And same applies for home cooks. If you learn how to make your own fresh bread and serve it to your guests, this what will put in their mind you as a cook who kills it in the kitchen. In this lesson, we are going to learn the principles and the most important things to know about bread baking. First of all, and I've kind of already mentioned it in my previous lessons, start using weights to measure your ingredients. Forget about the volume. Volume is not very good form of measurement of ingredients when it comes to cooking. Another important thing to know when it comes to baking specifically is baker's percentages. Baker's percentage is the amount of ingredient that is being used in this recipe as a percentage to the amount of flour in this recipe. For example, if I'm making some simple wheat tacos, the recipe would ask for 200 grams of flour, 100 grams of water, 60 grams of butter and 5 grams of salt. By the way, take note of this recipe, it's a really good one. In this case, the baker's percentage would be 100% of flour, 50% of water, 30% of butter, and 2.5% of salt. And that's where your high school maths will come handy. And in this case, you can scale your recipe very easily. Now pay attention here. Here comes the 3 pillars to baking success. The first one, I already mentioned it, use the exact measurements, gram to gram. If the recipe asks for 5 grams of something, use 5 grams, not 4, not 6, 5 grams, especially when it comes to chemical leavening agents. Use the exact ingredients that the recipe asks for. For example, there are so many types of flours, so make sure that you use specifically the type of flour that the recipe is asking for. By the way, we will be talking about flours later on in this lesson, so keep on watching. And the third one, use the specific directions that the recipe is asking for. In the future, when you get enough knowledge of this specific baking item and enough experience, you can play around with these pillars, you can use different measurements, you can substitute several ingredients, and you can alter the directions so it's more convenient for you. But when you're just starting out, when you're just using this recipe the first time and you are baking this specific type of bread the first time, follow the exact directions. Otherwise, you will never end up with the same kind of product. Depending on the type of bread that you're going to bake, there are 7 main ingredients that you will definitely come across. And the following 3 is the one that you will definitely find in any kind of recipe. Those are flour, some kind of liquid, and seasoning. And by seasoning, I mean salt, of course. Then the next most common ingredient would be some kind of leavening agent. And here it can be some kind of yeast, a fresh yeast or a dry active yeast, or a chemical leavening agent such as baking soda and baking powder. And the other 3 common baking ingredients are sugar, fat, and eggs. In this lesson, I'm going to talk to you about the most important element when it comes to baking, and that's flour. Plating. Undoubtedly the most exciting subject out there when it comes to the culinary world, and definitely the most asked for classes. Surprisingly though, it's not really being taught in culinary schools, and many chefs believe that you can't really teach plating in the same way that you can't teach good taste. And that's something that you need to figure out and explore on its own. But there are several fundamental principles when it comes to good plating. I call them the rules of plating. And that's something I'm going to teach you today. Rule number 1, know who you're serving your food to. In other words, know who your customer is, who is going to be eating your food, and what kind of visuals are more attractive to this kind of person at this particular time. Because there is a huge difference between foods that look beautiful and aesthetic like a painting of Monet and foods that look absolutely delicious and mouth-watering. Consider this example when exactly the same dish, a deconstructed honey cake with sour cream ice cream, was plated in 2 completely different ways for 2 completely different crowds. In the first example, you will see a plating that's more suitable for a fine dining restaurant that can be enjoyed at dinner time. And in the second example, you will see a more fun and casual type of plating of exactly the same dish, but that's more suitable for summertime, for an open patio cafe that can be enjoyed during lunch. Rule number 2, consider and think about plating before you start cooking. This is very important because in many cases you might need to adjust your workflow depending on the kind of plating that you have in mind, and some things would need to be done first. You might need to adjust your cuts and shapes of your ingredients. You might even need to find or obtain extra tools, and sometimes you might need to add or replace garnishes in order to contribute to the overall color theme of your final plate. For example, when you're making a tiramisu, if you do use chocolate, the chocolate usually goes on the very top at the very end of the whole process. However, in this specific example, the chocolate part had to be done in the very first place before even starting making the whole tiramisu, because the chocolate was used in order to create those edible vases that will carry the whole dessert inside. And in the second example of this Martian tofu, which is basically a combination of two simple ingredients, the silken tofu and isomold, this whole look, this whole plating won't be possible to achieve if the plating was not considered first before cooking, because the silken tofu had to be molded in a spherical shape, and the same goes for the isomold cage. Rule number 3. If you've already taken my previous class, you already know the main rules of food plating. And we're going to use these rules as a guidance for all the examples in this class. And they will be also available as the plating checklist in the resources section. Note here that the order of those checklist points doesn't matter so much. So here is all the mise en place for my first salad dish. And the salad that I'm going for is an Asian flavored inspired salad with some mango and celery and carrots and pickled onions. And it's going to be presented in the form of a beautiful bouquet. So what is an essential part of a bouquet? Flowers, exactly. That's why I've also added a selection of edible flowers. I have some electric daisies here, violets, and also cornflowers. If you're in doubt what kind of flowers are edible, do consult and go to your local microgreen store. They will for sure have a selection for you already. And I've also added a little bit, that I'm going to add a little bit of flower pollen, because what usually grows in nature together or is close in nature together usually is a good flavor combination as well. And the last part of our dish is a sauce, which is also an Asian flavored inspired sauce. Very easy to make. It's just a mix of 3 ingredients, which is soy sauce, sesame oil and honey. Once again, flowers, pollen, honey. It's a good flavor combination. Okay, let's start with the plating now. A must-have component of any good salad are the leafy greens. In this case, we will use our salad leaves as the wrapping for our bouquet. You might have noticed that all the other components in this salad had been cut with the same method, julienne. Visual consistency with the shape and size of your food cuts is an important tip to a beautiful food plating. So keep this in mind, guys, when you do plating for your own dishes. Choose one type of cut and stick to it, trying to perfect it and make each cut as identical as possible. Now let's create some volume to our bouquet by adding extra beautiful microgreens and flowers, of course. Volume and height is another important and actually quite overlooked aspect of good food plating. In real life, we see our food not as a overhead flat shot like on Instagram pictures, but rather as a 3-dimensional model. So keep this in mind as well. When picking the right flowers for your food plating, consider their taste. Some do not bear much taste at all, but some are rather electric, like the electric daisies that I have here, and their colors. It quite depends on the overall idea and message of your plate, but don't try to make it too colorful. Try to stick to 3 color varieties max. And even though the first description that comes to mind when you see this specific plating is colorful, there is actually only 3 colors here: green, purple, and a variety of orange. Finally, let's have a look at this overhead shot of the plate and analyze it with our plating checklist. This specific food presentation is definitely not designed for casual dining or for the kids menu. This is a fine dining plating, and it works well here. Everything on the plate is edible, although I was rather tempted to use the baker's twine here to tie the bouquet. All the main flavor-bearing ingredients of the salad were cut julienne, not just because it looks nice, but most importantly with the thought in mind of how it would be eaten. This salad should be eaten like a taco, and I don't want my ingredients to be falling out of my taco. As for the plate, I've chosen to have a white plate here, since the dish itself is rather colorful. If I had any kind of drawing or pattern on the plate, it would be too overwhelming. Plain canvas are perfect for most of the plating actually. And finally, the harmony on the plate. I was being quite risky here, choosing to make such an abundant in colors dish. That's why it was extremely important to keep a harmony. Instead of spreading all of these colors all over the plate, I've gathered them all on one side and left 70% of the plate clean, but also balanced it with some sauce and pollen. This gives the feeling of overall harmony and elegance. If you watched one of my previous classes on culinary education, you'll know that there are 5 widely accepted leading or mother sauces in the school of French cookery. Those are Bechamel, Veloute, Espagnole, Hollandaise and tomato sauce, all of which, by the way, we're going to learn in this series of classes. Each of these leading sauces is basically some kind of flavored liquid combined with a thickening agent. And the difference lies in the type of liquid and thickening agent that's being used. In case of bechamel, the liquid is milk flavored with bay leaves, onions and cloves, and the thickening agent is a white roux. The cool thing is that the French saucery has a structure. So once you master the technique of making these 5 leading sauces, which is quite attainable, right? It will be fairly easy and straightforward to make any other French sauce, since each one of these 5 sauces has a ton of derivatives, also known as small sauces. For example, in this class, we're not only going to learn how to make a perfect bechamel sauce, we're also going to learn how to make a mayonnaise sauce, a mustard sauce, and a non-toit sauce. And that's just the start of it. For the sake of time and the concept of this class, today I'm going to teach you the classical, the traditional way of making the bechamel sauce, using the easiest and the most convenient method. But I will also talk about the way that it's done in modern kitchens, using some modern equipment that might allow for faster or more flavor-concentrated results. And we will also talk about the common mistakes when making a bechamel sauce and their troubleshooting. To kick off the class, I'm going to show you how to make a clarified butter. This is a very useful technique to know. Not only we're going to use clarified butter for this class, for this sauce preparation, but we're also going to use it for further classes on other sauces. So I'm going to make a whole bunch of it. And there are also numerous applications for the clarified butter in other recipes in French cooking. Butter consists of 3 components: butter fat, water, and milk solids. And the clarified butter, as we know it, is the pure butter fat. So what are we going to do now? We're going to cut our butter into smaller cubes and melt it down on lower heat. We're going to cut it in blocks so it will be just faster to melt. So we can separate the butter into these 3 components. And we're only going to keep the butter fat, which is the clarified butter. Here's one safety tip for you. When you're trying to cut a block of butter or a block of cheese, or any kind of product that is hard to cut into, never put your pressure towards the tip of your knife. If you need to put extra pressure on, put it towards your other hand, your power hand. In that case, your hand will not slip and cut your wrist. So what we have right now here is the melted butter, split into several layers, as you can clearly see it. What we did, we just let the butter melt and that's it. But if we left it at the stovetop for a little bit longer, for about 15 to 20 minutes, we would end up with a different product by the name of ghee, which, by the way, you can probably buy it in your supermarkets. The difference between the clarified butter and the ghee lies in the flavor. The ghee flavor is a little bit more nuttier, just because of the longer cooking process. The reason why specifically clarified butter is used in many recipes in the French cuisine and in other cuisines is that the milk solids that are present in regular butter, they brown much faster, and usually we don't want any browning or burning to happen, so we remove them from the butter. And in this particular recipe and in other Now that the clarified butter is ready, we can prepare a roux. A roux is a culinary thickening product made of equal parts of flour and fat by weight. It's very important to use the right kind of flour for this recipe. We are using here the AP flour, the all-purpose flour, which is widely available everywhere. If you're going to use a different kind of flour in your case, then bear in mind its starch content. If it's different from the all-purpose flour, you might need to adjust your proportions. In order to make a roux, all you're gonna do is mix these two components together and slowly cook out the starch on a frying pan. You can also prep it in advance and store it in the fridge until you need it. Any roux is being cooked to eliminate the raw and starchy taste of flour. And the time of cooking depends on the kind of roux that you want to prepare. Generally, there are three types of roux: the white roux, the blonde roux, and the brown roux. For the bechamel sauce, we are going to prepare the white roux, which is about 1 to 3 minutes in time, the shortest and the fastest roux that you can prepare. But don't worry, I'm also going to show you how to make a brown roux for our other class on espagnole sauce. There are many ways how you can approach recipe development. As a professional chef, you'd be usually restricted or narrowed down to a theme of your restaurant. For example, if you work in an Italian restaurant, you'll be required to create dishes that are true to Italian cuisine. But if you are just starting out, you have no restaurant to run, or you're a home cook, where should you start? Well, that's easy. You should also start by narrowing down your focus, just as professional restaurant chefs do. When it comes to recipe development, or actually any major task completion, first thing you should do is to break down this huge and seemingly unachievable goal or task into smaller size puzzles. So step number 1 would be to choose a theme or a restriction for yourself. In our specific case, I, as a professional chef, specialize on fine dining and modernistic dishes. And I will be also creating a dish to share with my YouTube audience, who loves learning modern culinary techniques and molecular gastronomy. So my restrictions for this dish would be for this dish to be modernistic and must incorporate molecular gastronomy element or elements. These are two main restrictions that I have right now, still pretty broad. One fun thing that I like to do with my dishes is to create an illusion. So why not do the same for today's dish? So the third restriction that I'm going to have is to create an illusion with my dish. Finally, let's pick a dish. One comfort dish that I've been wanting to modernize for years already is Spanish paella, a rice dish that's native to Valencia region in Spain. To sum up, today I've chosen a common dish to base my recipe on, paella. And I've also chosen 3 restrictions for my recipe development. Create some sort of an illusion with the dish, incorporate molecular gastronomy culinary techniques, and give the final dish presentation a modern look. In other words, I'm trying to create a remixed version of the classical paella that will represent my unique approach to cooking and food philosophy. Now it's your turn to sit down, take your notepad out, and write down restrictions for your first dish. For the sake of this exercise, I'm going to advise you to stick to the same restrictions, just pick another comfort casual dish. So it will be easier for you to follow along each step with me through the whole class. But if you feel adventurous, you can of course choose your own restrictions for your dish. I'd love to see all your projects at the end of the class.